The gold price in Cairo is falling, and no one in the Mamluk capital understands why. It is not a war, it is not a famine, it is a man. He arrived from south of the Sahara with 60,000 people in his caravan, 500 slaves walking ahead of him, each carrying a staff of gold weighing roughly 6 pounds. Behind them were about 100 camels, each loaded with 300 pounds of gold. He is not a merchant. He is not selling anything. He is an emperor on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and he is giving the gold away to officials, to beggars, to anyone who crosses his path. His name is Mansa Musa, and by the time he leaves Egypt, the gold dinar will have dropped by 6 dirhams. The Cairo market will not recover for 12 years. The empire that sent him covered 1.3 million square kilometres, larger than every European kingdom of its era combined. It controlled roughly 2/3 of all the gold circulating in the medieval Mediterranean. It lasted nearly 4 centuries, and the family that built it never disappeared. They are still in the same region where their empire began. Every 7 years, in a village on the Mali-Guinea border, the descendants of Mansa Musa's dynasty gather around a mud-walled hut to retell the story of how it started. The empire is gone. The ceremony is not. Before there was an empire, there were 12 small Mandinka kingdoms scattered across the upper Niger River Valley, a region the Mandinka called Manden. The Keita clan ruled one of them, Kangaba, a modest chieftaincy on the river's western bank. Their claimed ancestry was theological. The dynasty's griots traced the bloodline back to Bilal ibn Rabah, the Ethiopian companion of the Prophet Muhammad and Islam's first muezzin. Modern historians treat this the way they treat European royal houses claiming descent from Troy, as a legitimation strategy, not a verifiable genealogy. What is verifiable is that the Keita were, by the early 1200s, one clan among many, with no particular reason to expect that their name would outlast the century. Around 1203, the Soso king Soumaoro Kante changed that equation. Soumaoro, remembered in oral tradition as a sorcerer king who wore human skin shoes and kept the skulls of conquered chiefs on the walls of his chamber, conquered the Mandinka kingdoms and most of the old Ghana Empire's territory. He killed 11 of the Keita king Nare Maghan Konate's sons. He spared the 12th only because the boy was not worth killing. Sundiata Keita had been born around 1217 to Nare's wife Sogolon Konde, a woman the griots describe as hunchbacked. The child could not walk. He crawled until roughly the age of 7, when, according to the epic, he pulled himself upright using an iron rod that bent under his weight, then stood on a wooden staff and walked for the first time. Soumaoro looked at this child and saw nothing. He let him live. It was the last mistake the Soso dynasty ever made. Sundiata was forced into exile after his father's death, hunted from court to court by Soumaoro's agents, moving through the kingdoms of Ouagadougou, Tabon, and finally, Mema, east of Manden, where the local king saw something in the exiled prince that Soumaoro had not. The king of Mema gave him soldiers. By his early 20s, Sundiata had assembled a coalition that crossed clan, caste, and ethnic lines. Generals including Tiramakan Traore, Fakoli Koroma, and Commandian Kamara, along with hunters, blacksmiths, and the warriors of a dozen allied chieftaincies. His sister Nana Triban, who had been married off to Soumaoro as a political hostage, smuggled out the secret of the sorcerer king's Tana. The spiritual vulnerability that oral tradition holds protected him in battle. In the legendary version, it was a white cock's spur. Sundiata tipped an arrow with it. Around 1235, at the Battle of Kirina near modern Koulikoro, the coalition met Soumaoro's army. The Soso broke. Soumaoro fled into the Koulikoro mountains and, according to the griots, was never seen again. He was transformed into stone or swallowed by the mountain itself, depending on which version the storyteller follows. Sundiata razed the Soso capital. By 1240, he had taken Kumbi Saleh, the old seat of the Ghana Empire, symbolically ending Ghana's prestige and replacing it with his own. He took the title Mansa, King of Kings, and established his capital at Niani on the Upper Niger. A boy who could not walk had built an empire. What he built next was arguably more remarkable than the conquest itself. The assembled chiefs gathered at the plain of Kouroukan Fouga near Kangaba and proclaimed what oral tradition treats as the empire's founding constitution, the Manden Charter. The text that survives today is a 1998 reconstruction from griot recitations, codified at a workshop in Kankan, Guinea, under the supervision of magistrate Siriman Koyate, and organized into 44 articles across 4 sections: social organization, property rights, environmental protection, and personal responsibilities. It is not a verbatim 13th century document, and historians like Jan Jansen and Francis Simonis have argued that parts of it reflect modern codification as much as medieval practice. But the tradition itself is real, and it is old, and what it says is striking. It advocated social peace across ethnic lines. It declared the inviolability of the human person. It addressed food security, universal education, freedom of expression, and the abolition of slavery by raid. Whether or not the precise wording dates to 1236, the Mandinka remembered these principles for 8 centuries and still recite them. That memory is itself a historical fact. Sundiata died around 1255. Oral tradition says he drowned in the Sankarani River, though sources conflict. Some accounts say he was killed by an arrow during a ceremony, others that he was assassinated. The succession that followed was turbulent. His sons Wali and Uwati ruled briefly, followed by Khalifa, who was assassinated for reportedly shooting his own subjects with arrows for amusement. But the empire held. It held because Sundiata had built something larger than a single ruler's personality, a system of provincial governance administered through farines and farbas, regional governors who collected taxes, maintained armies, and administered justice in the Mansa's name. A network of trade routes policed by the imperial cavalry, and a military apparatus that could survive mediocre leadership. The most dramatic proof of this came around 1285, when a former imperial slave named Sakura staged a coup, seized the throne, and, rather than destroying the empire, expanded it further than any Keita had managed. Sakura pushed the borders east to Gao, consolidated control over the trans-Saharan trade routes, and made his own pilgrimage to Mecca during the reign of Mamluk Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad. He was murdered on his return journey somewhere in the desert, and the Keita line was restored. The empire did not flinch. The system Sundiata had designed was stronger than the family that designed it. Mansa Muhammad, sometimes called Abu Bakr II, has one of the strangest stories in medieval African history. According to Ibn Khaldun, Muhammad became obsessed with the Western Ocean. He sent 200 ships into the Atlantic. One returned. The captain reported that the others had been swallowed by a current in the open sea. Muhammad was not satisfied. He assembled a second fleet, 2,000 ships according to Ibn Khaldun, appointed a deputy to govern in his absence, and sailed west himself. He never came back. No ship returned. No wreckage was found. The deputy he had appointed was his nephew, and that nephew's name was Musa. Musa came to power around 1312, inheriting an empire that his predecessor had abandoned for the Atlantic. His exact lineage is contested. Ibn Khaldun calls him the son of Abu Bakr, and whether he descended from Sundiata through a son or a daughter is a question historians have not resolved. What is not contested is what he inherited. By the early 1300s, Mali controlled the Bambouk goldfields between the Senegal and Falaim rivers and the Bouré goldfields on the Upper Niger, the 2 richest gold-producing regions in the medieval world. The Mansa claimed all gold nuggets found in the empire, and only gold dust could be freely traded. This was not merely a tax, It was a monopoly designed to prevent the currency from collapsing under its own abundance. Salt came south from the Saharan mines at Tag Haza, where a single load sold for 8 to 10 mithqal in the desert and 20 to 40 in the capital. The army numbered roughly 100,000, including 10,000 cavalry. The empire stretched from the Atlantic coast to the eastern bend of the Niger, from the southern edge of the Sahara to the forest fringe, encompassing modern Senegal, southern Mauritania, Mali, Burkina Faso, western Niger, Guinea, Guinea-Bissau, the Gambia, northern Ivory Coast, and northern Ghana. Musa ruled all of it. In 1324, he decided to go to Mecca. The pilgrimage route ran from Niani through Walata in modern Mauritania, across the desert to Tuat in Algeria, and then to Cairo. The journey alone was roughly 4,000 miles. The caravan that arrived in the Mamluk capital was unlike anything the Egyptians had seen. The Arab historian Shihab al-Umari, writing around 1340 from interviews with people who had witnessed the visit, recorded the scale: 60,000 people, 12,000 enslaved attendants dressed in brocade and Persian silk, 500 gold staff bearers, and 100 camels. Musa is said to have built a new mosque every Friday along the route, a claim that, even if exaggerated, reflects how the Arab sources understood the scale of his piety and his spending. His generosity in Cairo was indiscriminate and, for the Egyptian economy, catastrophic. He gave gold to every official who received him. He gave gold to the poor. He bought goods at several times their market price. Al-Umari recorded that Musa flooded Cairo with his generosity, and that so much gold entered circulation that it destroyed the value of the currency. The dinar fell by 6 dirhams. Merchants across the Mediterranean felt the shock. By one account, Musa realized what he had done and tried to correct it on his return trip by borrowing gold back from Cairo's moneylenders at extortionate rates, the only recorded instance of a medieval ruler attempting to perform monetary policy on a foreign economy he had accidentally destabilized. The diplomatic encounter was as remarkable as the economic one. When Musa reached the Mamluk court, he was expected to perform the customary prostration before Sultan al-Nasir Muhammad. He refused. The court waited. Musa waited. He agreed to meet only after being assured he would not be required to kneel. When he finally entered the audience chamber, he reportedly said he bowed only to God. Al-Nasir received him as an equal. It was the first time the Mamluk court had extended that recognition to a ruler from south of the Sahara, and the Mamluks at that moment were the most powerful Muslim state in the world. Musa brought back more than diplomatic prestige. He returned with the Andalusian poet-architect Abu Ishaq al-Sahili, who built the Jinguereba Mosque in Timbuktu in 1327, a structure that still stands. The Sankore Mosque, founded earlier under a wealthy Mandinka woman's patronage, was reorganized under Musa into a madrasa that would eventually become one of the great centers of Islamic scholarship in Africa. Timbuktu, which had been a seasonal trading camp frequented by Tuareg nomads, became a permanent intellectual capital. Scholars came from Fez, Cairo, and Andalusia. Manuscript collections grew into libraries. The city that Musa built would, by the 16th century, house an estimated 25,000 students, though that figure comes from the Songhai-era Tarikh al-Fattash and reflects Timbuktu's peak under Songhai patronage, not under Musa's Mali. In 1375, nearly 4 decades after Musa's death, a cartographer in Majorca drew the Catalan Atlas and placed Mansa Musa at the center of West Africa, enthroned, holding a gold nugget the size of a fist. It was the first time a sub-Saharan African ruler had appeared on a European map. The image defined how the outside world saw Mali for centuries. It still does. Musa died around 1337. His son Magan I lasted 4 years before being deposed by his uncle Suleiman, who took the throne in 1341 and held it for roughly 2 decades. Suleiman was the last Mansa strong enough to hold the empire together, and the best evidence for what Mali looked like at its height comes not from the era of Musa's spectacular generosity, but from the era of Suleiman's conspicuous thrift. In 1352, the Moroccan traveller Ibn Battuta arrived at the Malian court and was not impressed by his host's hospitality. His welcome gift, he recorded, consisted of 3 cakes of bread, a piece of beef fried in native oil, and a calabash of sour curds. When he saw it, he said, he burst out laughing. Suleiman, he wrote, was a miserly king, not a man from whom one might hope for a rich present. But Battuta's contempt for the gifts did not extend to the kingdom. He recorded the security of the roads. A woman could travel alone with gold and no one would touch her. He noted the strict administration of justice and the rigorous observance of Islamic prayer. He described the king's audience platform, a raised, silk-covered structure under a pavilion topped by a golden falcon, the red velvet European tunic, the gold skullcap, and the 300-man armed bodyguard. He also recorded a darker detail. Suleiman accused his principal wife, Kasa, of conspiring against him and imprisoned her. It is the most detailed eyewitness portrait of the Mali Empire that survives, and it was written by a man who thought the food was beneath him. The empire that Battuta described did not outlast the man who ran it. Suleiman died around 1360, and what followed was not a single catastrophe, but a slow subtraction that lasted 250 years. Suleiman's son Kasa reigned 9 months before a civil war brought Mari Jata II to power. Ibn Khaldun recorded that Mari Jata was profligate, that he sold pieces of the royal regalia, including a massive gold nugget that had been passed down from Mansa to Mansa as a symbol of sovereignty. The man who sold the nugget sold the dynasty's credibility with it. Provincial governors stopped obeying. Tributary states stopped paying. The empire that Sundiata had built to survive mediocre rulers had finally produced rulers so mediocre that even the system could not compensate. The losses came in sequence. In the 1430s, the Tuareg under Akil Ag Amalwal took Timbuktu, the intellectual capital Musa had built. Walata fell 3 years later. In 1465, the Songhai Empire under the Soni dynasty seized Mecca, one of Mali's oldest possessions. The same kingdom that had sheltered Sundiata during his exile was now taken by strangers. In 1468, Sunni Ali of Songhai took Timbuktu from the Tuareg, and the Tarikh al-Sudan recorded what happened next. Sunni Ali entered Timbuktu, committed gross iniquity, burned and destroyed the town, and brutally tortured many people there. The scholars of Sankore loaded 1,000 camels with books and fled to Walata. In 1473, Sunni Ali took Djenné after a 7-year siege. The Songhai would themselves be destroyed by the same technology that was about to end Mali, gunpowder arriving from Morocco in 1591. But before that destruction came, they consumed nearly everything the Keita had built. In 1487, the shrinking empire tried diplomacy. Mansa Mahmud Keita II received 2 Portuguese envoys, Pero de Vora and Goncalo Enes, and proposed a joint alliance against the Fulani and the Songhai. Nothing came of it. The Portuguese were interested in gold, not alliances, and the Keita had less gold to offer with each passing decade. Under Askia Muhammad, who overthrew Sunni Ali's son in 1493 and made his own pilgrimage to Mecca with 500 cavalry and 300,000 mithqal of gold, the Songhai absorbed most of Mali's remaining territory. In 1502, Askia Muhammad's forces defeated the Malian general Fati Kwali Keita and seized Diafunu. Around 1542, a Songhai raiding force reached the Malian capital itself. They used the royal palace as a latrine. In 1591, a Sardian Moroccan army under Judar Pasha crossed the Sahara with cannons and arquebuses and destroyed the Songhai Empire at the Battle of Tondibi. Mali briefly tried to fill the vacuum. It could not. By 1599, all that remained of the Mali Empire was a rump state around the Upper Niger. Mansa Keita IV, the last man to hold the title, launched an attack on Djenné, hoping to reclaim at least one city of significance. He was repulsed by the same Moroccan musketeers who had ended the Songhai. The firearms that had crossed the Sahara to destroy one empire now prevented the resurrection of the one that came before it. Mahmud died around 1610. Oral tradition says his 3 sons fought over what was left, which was almost nothing. No single Keita ruled Manden again. The family retreated to Kangaba, the same village where, nearly 4 centuries earlier, the Kouroukan Fouga had been proclaimed and the empire had been born. The dynasty that had crashed Cairo's gold market became provincial chiefs in the village where their story started. The Keita name did not vanish. It spread across Mali, Guinea, Senegal, the Gambia, Ivory Coast, Guinea-Bissau, and Burkina Faso. The surname Keita, in oral tradition meaning inheritor, became one of the most recognized patronyms in West Africa. But recognition is not power. The clan that had once commanded an army of 100,000 now commanded nothing, except the memory of having once commanded everything. There is no single internationally recognized head of the Keita dynasty today. The customary head of the Kangaba lineage holds the title of Bolontigi, owner of the Kama Blon, a strictly ritual office, not a sovereign one. 350 years after the empire ended, a Keita reclaimed state power. Modibo Keita, born in 1915 in Bamako, came from a Muslim family that explicitly claimed descent from Sundiata. He became a teacher in the French colonial school system, then an anti-colonial organizer, then a delegate to the French National Assembly. When the French Sudan became the Republic of Mali on the 22nd of September 1960, Modibo Keita became its first president. He named the country after the empire. He used the Keita lineage as political legitimacy, the descendant of the founders leading the nation again. He pursued African socialism, nationalized industry, co-drafted the Charter of the Organization of African Unity in 1963, and for 8 years governed a country named for a dynasty he said was his own. His ambition extended beyond borders, and he briefly merged Mali with Senegal into the Mali Federation, which collapsed within months. On the 19th of November 1968, Lieutenant Moussa Traoré overthrew him in a bloodless coup. Modibo Keita was imprisoned in Kidal in the northern desert, and held there for nearly a decade, denied visitors and denied adequate medical care. He died in custody in Bamako on the 16th of May, 1977. The official cause was pulmonary edema. Most accounts attribute his death to deliberate neglect. A Keita who had reclaimed the empire's name lost it the same way his ancestors did, not to a foreign conqueror, but to a man from inside the system who decided the current ruler was no longer useful. The cultural afterlife took a different form. Salif Keita, born on the 25th of August 1949 in Djoliba near Bamako, is a direct claimed descendant of Sundiata. He was born with albinism. In Mandinka tradition, albinism was treated as an ill omen, a spiritual contamination that brought shame to a noble family. His relatives cast him out. His royal status also forbade him from the griot caste's occupation of music. In Manden's social order, nobles did not sing. That was the work of the Djeli, the hereditary praise singers who served the noble families. A Keita was not supposed to perform. Salif Keita performed anyway. He joined the rail band of Bamako in the early 1970s, then the group Les Ambassadeurs, and by the 1980s had become the golden voice of Africa, one of the most celebrated musicians in the history of West African music, performing at concert halls from Paris to Tokyo. His albums Mansa of Mali and Mbemba invoke his Sundiata ancestry openly. In 2005, he founded the Salif Keita Global Foundation for people with albinism, turning the condition that had exiled him from his family into a cause. A prince who was forbidden from singing became the most famous voice his country ever produced. I covered King Farouk's grandson in a previous video. An Egyptian government clerk asked him to prove his father was Egyptian. His father was the king. The Keita experienced something structurally identical, except it took 4 centuries instead of 4 decades. The state that the dynasty built eventually forgot that the dynasty had built it. The name survived. The authority did not. What do you think that name means now? Is carrying the surname of a dynasty that ruled for nearly 4 centuries a form of survival, or is it just a permanent reminder of what the family lost? I have been thinking about this since I started researching this script, and I genuinely do not know the answer. Leave your thoughts in the comments. The village of Kangaba sits on the upper Niger, roughly 90 kilometers southwest of Bamako. It is small, it is quiet, and inside it stands a circular mud-walled structure called the Kamablon, the House of Speech, built in 1653, roughly 4 decades after the last Keita emperor died. Every 7 years, the local Keita lineage and the diabate griots from the nearby village of Kela gather to re-roof it. The ceremony lasts 5 days. On the night before the new roof goes on, the diabate recite the canonical version of the Sundiata epic, the Mansa Musa, the Gathering of the Kings, inside the still roofless sanctuary. Only autochthonous Mandinka are admitted within a 15-meter boundary. Oral tradition holds that any impure Keita who tries to lift the new roof will die on the spot. UNESCO inscribed the ceremony as Intangible Cultural Heritage in 2009. Documented performances include 1954, 1968, 1975, 1982, 1989, 1997, 2004, 2011, and 2018. The story has been told, without interruption, for nearly 800 years. In 2012, the story almost ended. Jihadist factions, Ansar Dine, al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and allied groups occupied Timbuktu. They destroyed the UNESCO-listed mausoleums of Sufi saints. They smashed the sacred door of the Sidi Yahya Mosque. At the Ahmed Baba Institute, they burned manuscripts, some of them centuries old, some of them dating to the era of the empire itself. But the majority survived, because a network of local librarians led by Abdelkader Haidara had already begun smuggling them out. Hundreds of thousands of manuscripts were hidden in metal trunks, loaded onto lorries and pirogues, and transported south to Bamako before the jihadists could reach them. The French military intervention in January 2013 liberated the city. On the 27th of September 2016, Ahmed al-Faki al-Mahdi became the first person in history convicted by the International Criminal Court for the war crime of intentionally destroying cultural heritage. He was sentenced to 9 years. The court ordered 2.7 million euros in reparations. The Mali Empire's legacy, the buildings Mansa Musa commissioned, the intellectual tradition he funded, the manuscripts his scholars produced, had nearly 700 years after his death set new international law. The gold market in Cairo recovered. The man who crashed it has been dead for nearly 7 centuries. The empire he ruled has been gone for more than 4 centuries. But in Kangaba, every 7 years, a family gathers around a mud-walled hut that is older than most European constitutions. The diabete griots begin to speak. They tell the story of a boy who could not walk, who pulled himself upright on an iron rod, who built the richest empire the medieval world had ever seen. The roof goes on. The story continues. The Keita are still there.